Hi, Small and Gutsy fans. I have a special surprise for you today. I was interviewed on the Fully Alive podcast by my friend and colleague, Mary Meduna Gross. Mary is an executive well-being coach in Chicago on a mission to empower conscious business founders to connect with their inner power so that their vibrancy will radiate positivity throughout their organizations. So you can see why we totally connected. This fall, she is launching a new networking group with Trusstegrity for these conscious business founders, CEOs, and professionals. I will post her link in the show notes, and mine, of course, is in the bio. And you can always send me the names of any nonprofit or for-profit organizations with a social impact under $10 million for their very own interview on Small and Gutsy. So now I know firsthand how it feels to be literally on the other side of the mic. The pressure's on, but I do feel the interview was great fun. Mary's absolutely wonderful and highlighted Small and Gutsy in such a lovely way. A huge thank you to Mary for making this happen, and to my great sound engineer, Pavel Franson, for helping me put this all together. So here goes.
We're here. Hello, everyone. For those of you who may have wondered where we've been for the last 20 minutes, we had some technical difficulties that required a little bit of patience for us to work through, but we're here now and absolutely delighted to be here. So let me just, I have to continue to shake off that energy from the technical stuff. I feel a little chills running down my shoulders. I am delighted to welcome you all, and especially Laura, to this conversation for the Fully Alive podcast. Laura, thank you so much for making the time to be here. Thank you for your patience with these technical difficulties. I am just delighted to be able to spend the next few minutes with you.
Oh, Mary, I'm the one who's delighted. First of all, the fact that we were both patient and determined speaks volumes about who we are as people. Your energy, your determination, you did not get ruffled, and we figured it out, right? We figured it out. So we're here. Thank you. Thank you for hosting me. You are my first interview about Small and Gutsy and anything else you want to ask me. So to me, it's an absolute privilege because I'm usually in your chair.
Yes.
And now I get to feel the anxiety of when I interview folks and what they go through. So I deserve every bit of this, but thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as Laura mentioned, she is the host for the Small and Gutsy podcast, and we're going to hear about that in a minute. But we also, we're going to talk about life. And Laura and I connected about a year ago, and a lot has happened in both of our lives since then. So we're probably going to sprinkle in a bit of that. But what I love about Laura is that she really is about giving. This whole spirit around conscious entrepreneurship in business to make the world a better place. And in order to do that, it's all around collaboration. And from the very first time that I connected with Laura, and Laura, to be honest with you, I'm not even quite sure how that connection came about. But I felt this instant connection with you. I kind of felt like our missions were aligned. Although you're doing it in a slightly different way than I am, I think we're really on the same mission. So that's why I really wanted to be able to share this with the audience today, because while we don't usually talk about nonprofits, and that's definitely part of this conversation around conscious entrepreneurship and making the world a better place.
Oh, I love that.
So Laura, tell us a little bit about you. Let's get to know you a little bit before we get into Small and Gutsy.
Well, Mary, to a couple of your points, we met through a colleague of mine, Dr. Nancy Zayer, and right, do you remember that? And you and I instantly connected, and we were like, oh my gosh, we got to do something together. This is so great. And then I got breast cancer, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I still worked through all of that, but I had to pick and choose the things that I could really spend time on. I was teaching and consulting and continuing the podcast, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I started out as a for-profit, just a podcast like everybody else. My focus, because where it really came from was my doctoral work. I finished my doctorate in 2000, the winter of 2000, actually December of 2018. So 2019, I started working with nonprofits, and it was really on messaging and smaller organizations, because I focused in that arena primarily because nonprofits can't use public money to market. And donors don't like to give money for marketing purposes, but I can't think of a business, and a nonprofit is a business, on the face of this earth that doesn't market in order to sustain themselves, right? It makes no logical sense. So I use some of Edward Deming's work on continuous improvement, the Toyota way, that concept. And I shifted it to thinking, how can nonprofits use resource? And I thought social media. So then I coined the phrase gamifying engagement. I actually trademarked it. And I had a method of using his iterative process, but around messaging and making it into a game, whether it was a high-tech game or a low-tech game. So what I mean by that is most folks who work in nonprofits know what their specific job is, but they don't always know how to sell the organization because they're busy working with clients. They don't think about donors and they don't always have access, but they also don't recognize that they're ambassadors and have a huge network. And so basically, I wanted to get a sense of messaging that everyone could buy into. And then anyone in the organization could talk about the organization from really a messaging standpoint, whether it was a tagline, whether it was some written work. And so you could hang up a huge Post-it paper in a break room when, we were before COVID, and write down 5 words about the that makes you think of the organization. And then you build stuff around that. And that's a low-tech version. A high-tech version, which isn't even high-tech, is you use social media, which now we've exploded. This is, before COVID. Where you'd ask a question and engage people. And the more engagement you have, it's an opportunity to market. And so nonprofits don't have any problem getting clients, and they can use dollars to do that and to, be able to do outreach, what's called outreach, but they're not allowed to use it for marketing purposes. So my goal was to help them. And then I started to work with clients post my doctorate. I was having a ball, and then COVID hit, and most of my clients were the smaller nonprofits and social impact organizations. Are like, we don't know how we're going to keep the doors open, and we don't know how to feed people. So then I thought to myself, I worked on contract for one of my clients for about 10 months. In the big sort of data space. It was international, it was a nonprofit. They were great organization, still are. And after that contract, I thought, what am I going to do while we're still in the midst of COVID for these clients who are having a hard time, reaching out, but they're not going to spend time on marketing when they're worried about how they're going to feed their clients. So I thought, okay, the biggest bang for the buck is doing a podcast to try to reach as many people as I can. So I targeted those under 10 million. My doctorate was really much smaller in terms of sort of target group. And I also include for-profits that have a social impact, because I think, like you, good people who are really trying to impact the world are people I want to hang around with. So not only do I want to learn about their passion, but it has been one of the most beautiful journeys I can ever share with you. I recently turned it into a nonprofit so that I could raise a little bit of money to continue to pay for social. I do my own social media right now, but pay for my sound engineer, pay for my web presence, which is actually my consulting group, but I have a small web presence for Small and Gutsy. So it's growing, but it's growing little bits at a time. And primarily because, as I mentioned, I got a little shocker last fall. Now it's been a year where I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And my immediate thing to do was, I actually had a friend of mine who pushed me to get an ultrasound. I always had mammograms. I didn't know that dense breasts were harder to diagnose without an ultrasound. So I went to my physician at the time, and he said, oh, you don't need, they're just watching it for 6 months. You can't get back in. And so I had to wait the 6 months from when they saw something but said, oh, it's benign, it's nothing, you have dense breast, don't worry about it. But I had never had an ultrasound. So I had an ultrasound, and sure enough, they said, we're going to biopsy this. And sure enough, it came back as invasive lobular carcinoma, which is a tricky kind of cancer. And so sadly, with all my other tests, I had to have chemotherapy, radiation, surgery first. I had a lumpectomy, and then I had chemo, radiation, and then now I'm on 2 different types of medication to take every ounce of estrogen. All we want is estrogen, and I had to take every ounce of estrogen. And I was so low risk, so I started a mini little campaign during October when it was conclusive, right before I had surgery, to get as many women who know that they have dense breasts to make sure they get an ultrasound, because that really is one of the ways, besides an MRI, which is much more expensive and much more invasive, and you have radiation. An ultrasound, there's nothing harmful about it, and it's a very inexpensive exam. In fact, I had to pay for my initial one because my doctor didn't. He gave me the referral, but they wouldn't necessarily approve. And then when I came back, they were like, okay, we'll pay for everything. No,
Wow.
I'm kidding. So I can joke about it now because I feel like my energy is coming back. But I would not wish this on anyone. And I know I'm lucky compared to a lot of people, and unlucky in other ways. And but I'm incredibly grateful that I had a mini little platform by which to use. And I'll probably, talk about it again this next October, just to do a shout out for women to make sure they get these diagnostic exams, because the earlier you detect something, the better the prognosis is. And the medicines and things that they have are so good. I'm not fully out of it yet, but I believe that I will be okay, and I'll live, hopefully another 30 plus years. Let's hope. We'll see. But it does do a number on you, physically and emotionally and all the rest of it. So probably more than you needed to know on the podcast. But
not at all. I mean, in fact, that's why we have these conversations, because, when you do a podcast like this, it's for conscious entrepreneurs, and we tend to just talk about business kinds of things,
right.
which is more of the traditional kind of business entrepreneur, right? So we're talking about strategies and those kinds of things. And that's really one of the reasons why I made the shift back in the spring from the Consciouspreneur podcast to the Fully Alive podcast, so that we could really talk about the who that's behind the business.
Yeah,
Because I really believe that the who, the business is a reflection of the who. And so if we're not seeing what we want to see in our business, if we come back to us, we don't have to fix the business.
Right. It's so
We don't
true.
even have to fix us. We don't even have to fix us, but we can remove the barriers from within ourselves.
100%. And, it's funny because I think I love doing the podcast, and it is pro bono for every guest. They don't pay for a thing. They can have all the materials. They can post it. They can do what they want. But it is I believe in the reciprocity of giving. I get from giving. And I love to give because I get so much out of it. Do I still have to figure out a way to fund it and do the financial stuff and think about the paperwork and much more to do with, from a nonprofit perspective? Absolutely. And it's a headache. And do I like it? No, I don't like that part. But what I've gained from doing the podcast is I have met some of the most interesting people around the world who are doing work that I think is magical. It helps other people, whether, again, they can be for-profits that make a huge difference, or nonprofits. And I interview both. And I like them under 10 million, because once you get to be 5 or 6 million, actually, you can hire your own marketing folks. Sure. But the smaller ones struggle with raising their visibility and spreading their networks. And for people who are looking for a job, wanting to volunteer, maybe wanting to invest in, if it's a for-profit, or donate to, they can do this because they've heard this podcast. Yeah. And I've been moved by what other people do. Sometimes I think maybe it's because I can't land in one solid area. So I love learning about all of these things. But I want to believe that it's because each organization in and of itself is so unique and such a contributor, and it fills my soul. I always feel energized. In fact, I did one the other day that hasn't gone out yet. I am doing some volunteer work for them through another channel of mine. And one of the guests said, I bet you, how do you spread yourself so thin? Do you volunteer for every single organization you interview? And I said, I wish I could. I really wish I could. I find them to be amazing, but of course I can't. But I think one of the things I get to do is I get to do a podcast for them.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? And what you're saying too about guests and the opportunity to explore things with guests, and have conversations with guests that I would never have otherwise had a conversation with. So for that reason, I also love doing the podcast. I like being the host of the podcast, and sharing those messages, those stories. As you were describing stories, one of the things that was coming up for me is an awareness that I justify this by saying I come from education background, right? And so for me, a good lesson has a clear objective and clear activities that are going to lead to the objective. And then there's a conclusion and a summary and kind of like cementing everything in together. And I still find myself in that rather rigid format. And in fact, I was working on a lead generation thing this week, and I kept trying to jam something into this lead magnet. And then I saw somebody else's lead magnet, and I read theirs, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to teach over here. And that's not my job. My job is to tell a story.
Right. That's so right.
Yes. And so once I said, oh my God, you don't have to teach anything. This is just about telling a story. Now, what's the point of your story? We can still have our objective.
Right. Of course. And it needs to make a difference. I mean, it needs to make a difference to you and to others. And so how do you craft that? And for me, it's not a manipulation. I think what you're talking about is an honest, genuine integrity in how you approach the work, whatever the work is. And the work can be, in the finance world, it doesn't have to be, but if you're conscious about how you approach it and then how you think about it. I teach at USC, and I'm teaching in the policy school. And actually, I love this course that I teach because I ask students, they're going to get into groups on a social issue they care about. And the first part of it, and I created this aspect of it, which I'm really proud of, is they have to write a memo, a short, concise memo to the class and to me about their recommendation is to study. And this is one of the hardest assignments for them because they want to talk about the social issue. They don't want to talk about the objective of the memo, which is this should be one of our 5 topics over the course of the semester. So I keep them, I give them examples and so on and so forth. But what I'm asking them to do this coming week is I'm asking them to do a pitch. Okay. Because you have to get a group of at least 4 other people who are really interested in your social issue. And I decided this is the first year I'm going to do this. And I did work through my cancer treatment, and I don't know if I was as enthusiastic as I feel right now. So this is going to be interesting for me to see the change this fall. But I decided I'm going to do a pitch.
Okay.
So I have a social issue. I'm going to do a pitch for them. They don't have to join. They don't have to do mine. I just want to demonstrate both a hook, and you have to answer the question. And this is to your point, who cares?
Yeah.
I care, and I know that I care about this particular issue, but why should anyone else care? No. Years ago, I worked in the HIV world, HIV prevention, as both a consultant, a supervisor, not in direct service, but really as a consultant. And it was a wonderful, amazing experience. And I worked on some grants. It was great. And I had friends in my social world who said, why would you do that? You're, married, you have kids, you're not in that world. And I said, you're kidding, right? It's a public health issue for everyone. If we don't eradicate or control this in some way, it hurts everyone. Right. And I'm part of everyone. And I feel that way about COVID. Of course, COVID was pervasive in a very different way. But there were groups of people, and I'm not going to comment politically at all, but you have to do your part, whatever your part is, to help society. We live in an environment where we do pay taxes, where we should look out for our neighbor, and we all want the same things. We want to live in a safe place. We want good schools. We want access to food. We want access to healthcare. I mean, it's not rocket science, but we make it hard for ourselves.
We do.
So, sorry, long-winded answer, long-winded response. But yeah, it's really about when you talk about building a curriculum or trying to find a sales funnel or kind of you're so right. It's what's the compelling story. And if I don't believe in the compelling story, nobody else is. And I have kind of a funny story to share. Early in my work life, in my 20s, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had the opportunity to live in New York City right from college, undergrad. And I worked for a sheet and towel manufacturer in sales and marketing. Okay. Hilarious me selling sheets and towels. Okay. Yeah. I learned the ropes and it was a great experience in a lot of ways. But it was often, I had to find a way to care about sheets and towels. Like it wasn't my thing, right? Yeah. And what I realized when I would go, because I had a smaller market, because I was a newbie, I would go into these retail stores and talk to buyers, and this is how they survived. They wanted the product on their shelf for a short period of time and off their shelves. So once I got in the head of that it mattered to them, then I could figure out a way that it mattered to me because it was their livelihood. Yeah. And so I shifted that thinking versus, do I really care about sheets and towels? I mean, people do, don't get me wrong, sure. But it wasn't my wheelhouse. But it was a great experience. And then the same is true inside the organization, to value the administrative and support staff, whereas a lot of people would never get their orders in on time because they were frankly rude to the people who were doing the admin work. And I'm a Midwesterner. I'm a pretty polite person usually, but I didn't do it in a manipulative way. I really honored the role they were in because I didn't want to do that. And I ended up befriending folks because I saw them and cared about them and valued what they did. Yeah. And that's part of the beauty of really something that matters to you. You try to figure out in somebody else why it would matter to them. Right. And if it doesn't matter to you, but it's a job that you have to do because you got to, put food on the table, then you go through that same method of, how do I figure out why it matters to them? And then maybe you find another job or move on, which is what I did because I knew it wasn't a long-term fit for me, but it was a great experience.
There's so much there that I want to come back to. One of the words that you've used often here is belief. Right. Mm-hmm. You had to, and I'm somewhat translating here, but you had to make towels and sheets mean something to you. You had to believe in the importance of towels and sheets. Mm-hmm. Couldn't have done that. There's no way that you would have been able to sell anything. And again, I think this kind of comes back to that conversation around conscious entrepreneurship versus traditional entrepreneurship, which the marketing is often very manipulative and right. I don't know how else to describe it. I think that's good enough. Yeah. And I think a lot of us that define ourselves as conscious entrepreneurs do struggle with that part because we don't want to be the manipulative marketer that we all despise. Right. We all get the willies from. So what I hear you say is when I'm finding what is it that I can believe in, first of all, that's authentic, right? And so now if I believe in towels and sheets and I believe that these towels and sheets are going to make your life better and how they're going to make your life better, it probably would be really hard for you to argue with my message, even if I don't have the right words, even if I'm not putting them in the right order.
That's a good point.
You're responding to my energy. You're not responding to my words. The words just help move it along, I think.
Right. I think, you're so right. I think hopefully folks, I believe this is true. We all know when we've been treated differently, when we've been treated not in the way we want to be treated. Many of us, have had that experience. And so if you don't ignore that and you think about, okay, I want to go with someone that has more of a genuine approach, even if it's something that seems like not, a very conscious way of thinking, but it still means something to someone out there because they're trying to make a living. And so when you put it in the context, as you're talking about, it is finding meaning in whatever you're doing and knowing that you can change what you're doing over time. You may not be able to do it right away, but you can over time.
So I love that point too, because I've got a preview. I've got a new website coming out here in the next week or two.
Great.
A new name is Plena Vita, which means full life, which is
I love
alignment with this podcast as fully alive. And there was part of me, and in fact, I brought this story to one of my networking groups that it's more than networking, right? This is our really support group.
Yeah.
And I was criticizing myself, or, well, here Mary goes again, a new name, a new website and all of this. And I'm thinking on the technical side, what a pain in the neck it is to,
Right.
set all of these things up. And I said, but every time I've done this, it's because I've had a significant upgrade.
Right. Think about, yeah. And
so my friend says back to me, well, Mary, because I'm saying, like, this is it. This is the last time. I'm not changing my name. I'm not doing this anymore. And he goes, Mary, if you're telling me that every time you've changed your name, it's because of a significant upgrade, why would you not want
keep going? Right.
Consider the possibility. Not that you
Right.
have to,
Right.
but leave that door open. Who knows what's going to happen?
Right. Even, if you look at some of the bigger companies, I mean, you could even take Starbucks. They first went with the name, they've kept the name. But if you really look at some of their advertising now, they just have to have the green and a circle, and people know what it is. So that, in the world of when I've sort of explored this in my gamifying engagement and consulting with clients, we call it an iterative process. It's not the first time out that you get the gold star. Now, you may hit it and it may be great, but I can't think of any organization that has survived through different, both technological and social changes, that hasn't iterated in some way or another. I mean, my whole podcast is an iteration out of necessity, because I wanted to keep doing something in a space that was taken up by great need that I couldn't do anything about. So because of COVID, people were not doing marketing in the same way. They were just trying to survive. And so I believe in that iterative process. And speaking of which, we recently changed our tagline. So I haven't changed it on everything, but I love it. And I love the process I went through with my board. Very quick, it was sort of like the name, the messaging piece. And we came up with spreading social impact, rather than big little social impact sector, which meant something to me. But as one of my sons said, I don't really know what sector means. I don't really know what, social sector. So spreading social impact is very clear, 3 words. And so as things start to change, and, I'm going to get t-shirts out and all the rest of it, but I'm thrilled with it. And I more than anything, I loved the process, because I don't have to be the one that comes up with it. I want to be involved in the brainstorming and the group, sort of the thinking through and playing with it. And actually, I think it was my sound engineer who came up with some of the words too. So it was really fun. He's coming to the board meetings and fully involved, and he's been with me since the beginning. So it's really a labor of love. And I think you should keep iterating,
I will.
I really like your expression better than iterating, but it's like, this is a level of improvement. You kind of, you keep opening doors, and they keep, taking you down a path. That's an upgrade. I love that.
What's interesting about this, again, is, to me, my whole message, right? So I'm telling my friend this, and I'm not going to do this again. That little kind of thing is the kind of little thing that keeps us from growing.
Oh, you're so right.
Because our unconscious mind doesn't know that I was just throwing this out there, and I'm just really uncomfortable, and I don't want to have to go through all of this changing again. But to say I'm never doing this again could literally stop me from ever doing it again. And now I'm boxed into what I have now, which right now feels great. But if I'm growing, that could also get to be small again, right? And tight again.
Right.
And I think this is how we get ourselves stuck, is that we create these rules for ourselves, and then we stick to it, and as if, they came to us from on mountain on high kind of thing.
Right. It's so true. And it's not to say that something that you absolutely love, or a piece of it, you won't bring forward or you won't hold on to. Yeah. And at the same time, what I hear you saying is, we can't stay open, and we can't put aside some of our fear, which we all have. Like when you're jumping into something new, what kind of feedback am I getting? Is somebody not going to like it? Whatever. We all get feedback that we don't always like. But if we're open to the possibilities, then we don't shut those cracks in the door that open up a little bit, or the window. We sort of peek inside and say, I'm going to jump in. I remember the first time I did the podcast, Small and Gutsy. I still don't always know what I'm doing.
Right.
I don't give questions out, as
No?
we've talked about it. I do have the same quick and gutsy questions at the end, which are never usually quick, but we get some pearls.
Yeah.
And I had never, I've interviewed people I'm a social worker by training. I'm a therapist by training, but haven't done straight therapy. I do consulting and I do, coaching and this kind of work that I absolutely love, but I really hadn't been on one-on-one that was going to then be posted to whoever was going to listen. And but I just remember thinking, Mary, this is not about me. This is about the other person. And I think when you think about the upgrading, or I probably have the term wrong, sorry about that, but sort of iterating in some way, it isn't about you. It's about the entity that you've created to help others.
Yes.
And therefore, it isn't a reflection on you. It's a response that you're having to something in the world that has given you more stuff.
Yeah.
And that's so I front loaded a lot of the content early on because I had so many contacts and people were at home and they weren't going to, they were working from home. So it was easier to do the podcast on Zoom and so on and so forth. So we produced one a week that first year, and it just got overwhelming after a while because then I also was teaching and working to support the podcast. But I just loved the exploration, and I just didn't want to stop doing it. And so it's morphed into a nonprofit, as I've said. And again, it's pro bono, it's free, not that anyone would pay, but it's like free marketing. It's not the difference between small and gutsy and internal marketing is internal marketing, of course, is going to say great things about the organization because that's their job.
Right.
I don't have that job. I get to interview you. And it is because I'm not a journalist. I'm not looking for those, oh my God, where'd I get you? What did you do wrong? But I'm naturally curious about how your program works and how it helps others and what even the for-profit social impacts, what impact do you want to make? And so it's been just it's been a gift for me, actually.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Isn't that amazing too? When you find the work that is aligned with your purpose, that it feeds you as much as you feed it.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. That. Yeah. And we'll see where it goes. I love the concept of iteration. We'll see where it takes me, just like yours. I'm so excited that you're launching something that isn't entirely new. It's a packaging of something that you hadn't thought of or came to you or from something that you thought this is going to be much more aligned with who I am, which is really what you said.
Yep,
So,
that's exactly what it is. Well, before we go, I want to spend some time talking about small and gutsy. So tell me the mission, and if I heard you correctly, will test my listening skills, is really to be that marketing voice for these nonprofit organizations that don't have the marketing dollars. And so this is your way of helping them get the word out, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And they can use the material. They can have the raw material. We always post it. I have an Instagram, Small and Gutsy. I have a Facebook page, Small and Gutsy. I try to post on my own personal one so that friends who may not be on Small and Gutsy will hear it or whatever. So I do my part. And then they can do what they want. I hope they post on their website or send it to all their board members or all their networks to then send it out. Because again, it's not an internal piece. Nobody paid somebody to do this and say, you're great. Right. It's somebody on the outside who discovered them or was a referral and said, I'm curious about what you do. I'd love to hear more. Yeah. And so it's really, it's a lot of fun. Yeah. What's interesting is all the people I meet with, they're not professional interviewees, obviously. Right. And so sometimes the conversations go astray. Sometimes and it's my job to sort of pull it together. And I think that's where I have my social work or therapy skills, try to. Yeah. Sometimes I'll have 5 people on a podcast. I'll be like, oh, this is going to be long and hard to manage. And invariably, I do fall in love with every organization I interview because I just find it invigorating and energizing and inspiring is probably the word that I would say. And it really is, the whole purpose is an audio journey into this space of social impact of really, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, really making a difference in other people's lives, whether it's the environment, whether it's homelessness, whether it's addiction. I've done many programs on addiction, whether it is on marginalized communities that are trying to get help, whether it's, again, on various aspects of need that are out there, whether it's food deserts, gardens that are producing green space, whether it's environmental. I did a great one in Peru on bringing fresh water to indigenous populations. And so it was a challenge to even get connected to an indigenous population that would trust a white woman who started this. And it was, it's a terrific opportunities for people to learn what's out there and what people do. And I think more than anything, of course, that's the most important aspect. But what I really love is the passion that people have to sometimes quit their day job and jump in and do this because they have a calling. Yeah. And I see you in the same bucket, even though it's, the social impact you're trying to make is being really connected to your soul of what you're meant to be. And you're in that same bucket of integrity and being genuine and really trying to help people find what they're meant to do, whatever it is. And I think there's nothing better than revealing that and seeing that. It's beautiful, frankly.
Thank you. And and I'm glad that I have grown through, had my own growth journey so that I can now embrace this.
Yeah, of course. It's interesting that you say that. I think we all are on that journey. Yeah. And so we have to have had something in our lives that brought us to this place. Okay. And I think it's, it's how things get started and how things are often successful.
I think entrepreneurship has also taught me to have a whole new relationship, and I'm going to say failure for a lack of a better word, but for things not going the way that I think they should. Again, I'm a recovering control freak. I'll say that, right? I'll say that. But the thought that I was supposed to figure everything out and set everything up so that it would be easier for everyone, and I'm just realizing that that's not what needs to happen. Clarity of vision is important. Obviously, having your knowing what your values are so that you're in alignment with your values as you start to implement.
Yeah.
And really leaning into the energy around the implementation. And like we're talking about these upgrades and these kinds of things. If I'm in my head, I'm trying to control it, I wouldn't be where I am in this, where I'm at now.
Right. That's so true. Because we can't orchestrate. Yes. Right. As much as we think we can control things, which I think I fall a little bit into that, but I have to give us both credit because neither of us freaked out in the beginning when the technological stuff of this was like, how are we going to do it? How are we going to see each other? How's this going to work? Yeah. And, both sort of having control. It's like in some way I think sometimes it's a relief to give up some of that control because in doing so, you're open to what organically might occur that is in fact better than what you might have orchestrated in the first place. And I feel like I'm not quite there yet, but people have told me cancer will be a gift. I'm not there yet. I'm going to be honest. Right. Where it's been a gift, if I have to put it in that category, is I had a colleague of mine who's also a friend who was diagnosed. And much after me, almost about 8 months after I was, and I could totally be there for her. She doesn't live super close, but I remember saying, I promise you will be okay. Now I can't guarantee that, but just being allowed to say that empowered both of us to go on this journey because it's not an easy journey. And I also think that I had to ask myself, does this situation really matter enough for me to have to jump in and do X, Y, and Z? Can I let it go? And I want to stay in that space. Mm-hmm. And I also had a friend gift me, she's amazing, gift me a course that she teaches. And we did one-on-one in mindfulness. And it's from the Herbert Benson Institute. And she is remarkable. And I use mindfulness regularly. I actually start my classes with deep breathing. Nice. Because I really believe I've got to stop whatever their crazy life is outside for the little bit of time we have together so we can all be together in the same space. They don't have to participate, but I do it. I do it for me and I do it for the space. And it really, to me, those things have actually now are part of my, I hope, part of my DNA moving forward. And
I'm sure it will be. Like, I think that, again, it's changing my relationship to hard times. Because when I was in hard times, we get into that funk of there's always going to be hard times, and I'm not good at writing all the messages. I'm not good enough, or I failed here, or whatever.
Right.
And now there's hard times. There's still hard times
right
now.
Right.
But what I see now is, I wonder what I'm going to learn out of this.
I love that. Oh, that's such a great frame. And I forgot, I'm not going to get this wrong. I forgot who said, hard times are what really is what life is about. Yeah. The other is just like, icing on a cake, right? The cake is the hard stuff. It's when you weather that, that's, really what life is about, how you weather that. And so asking yourself, what am I going to learn from this? Or what are my takeaways that are going to continue to make me who I am? Because I hope we never stop growing and learning. So I love that. It's hard. I have kids, and it's hard sometimes when you see them in a space where you want to go, do it, don't do this, do this. It's going to be better for you, Mom. And so but I've also learned that I can only offer, now they're at the age where I can only be a consultant to them.
Yeah.
I can't control stuff in their lives, and stuff's going to happen. Of course, you don't want anything bad to happen to anyone you love. But I also think that things will happen, and I just hope I have the strength, and they do, to weather whatever it is and move forward. And so it's, we move from being fully in charge of our children when they're little to really being consultants. And my sister-in-law once shared something. She'd gone to a lecture, and I love this, and I keep it in my mind. When they're really little, you're the boss. Yeah. And then when they're sort of adolescents, you're like the manager. You're managing this, you're managing that. Then when they get older and grown up, you're a consultant. And what's interesting about being a consultant is they can fire you.
That's right.
And I keep that in mind. Every time I want to give feedback, I'm like, they could fire me. Let me ask them if they really want this feedback, or what are they asking? So I try to be asking a lot of questions and sitting and listening to their responses, because of course I want to be more directive, because I've been in there,
Exactly.
It's funny, but I love that frame.
To that point too, and this is what's coming up for me, so I hope it's okay for me to share this. But
of course.
I think that what I come back to, because I too, I can hear what people are doing or their beliefs, and if you could just shift that, your whole experience would be different. But we're not in a coaching relationship. It's not appropriate for me to make those comments. So what I've come back to is, and my grandmother was my model for me. She believed in me before there was any reason to believe in me, let alone me believing in myself. And so that's really what I come back to, is even if I see people aren't doing things the way that I would, or I have information that would be different, change things for them, I just trust that they are on the right path, doing the right things, and life is unfolding for them at the right time and in the right way. And if they do need or want something from me, they'll ask for it.
Right.
It's not a direct request. And if I'm paying attention, I can catch that. But if I don't, I can still trust that everything is going to unfold for them the way it should.
I so love that for so many reasons. I have a tendency, and I've really curbed this in the, recent years, in the last probably 4 or 5 years. I would be doing a consulting gig prior to COVID, and I had the experience sometimes of, and this is sometimes in social situations too, where I see a pattern or I see something and I'll name it before somebody's ready to hear it.
Yes.
And that is problematic.
Yes.
I could be 100% right. It doesn't matter. But if they're not ready, it doesn't matter how right I could be. And I might be, but I'm actually wrong because the timing isn't there for them.
Right.
And that's what you're talking about, is you want to still continue to be an observer and a listener and, a guide for what they need. But the biggest thing is what they need when they're ready. And you'll know, because they will let you know. And so in my social relationships, oftentimes I'll say, do you want me to share my response or my reaction? And if they say, no, not really, or yeah, or there's hesitancy, I might kind of test the waters, but not really do too much, because if somebody is not ready, it's not useful. It actually can be very hurtful.
Exactly.
And so I've become much more aware of that. This is a gift that I have that I love, and I need to use it wisely, because it's not fair. And I could be wrong. And because I am wrong, because if it's not the right time, then I am wrong.
Exactly. That's right. Well, I think this is a lovely way to close this very delightful conversation, Laura. Before we go, where can people, if they know of nonprofits and they want to reach out to you, or if they have more questions for you, how do they find you?
So thank you so much, Mary, for that. And thank you for this amazing conversation. For nonprofits or social impact organizations that are under 10 million, it's free. It's a free podcast, so they can use the material, in any way that they want to. And they can send organizations or questions to my direct email, which is Wittcoff, which is LWITTCOFF@gmail.com. I'm on Instagram with Small and Gutsy, without the ampersand, just Small and Gutsy. And you can find me on Facebook, Small and Gutsy, Big Little Social Impact Sector. I haven't changed that tagline yet. I kind of like that for that page. I haven't decided. But I'm so happy. And it's free marketing for them. And my hope and goal is to help broaden their networks, to help spread their word for the amazing work that they're doing. And the interviews are similar to this one, Mary. It's just a fun conversation about the work that they're doing. And I learned so much. And for those listening, anybody who just wants to get on the podcast, I'm on all the channels. So I'm on Spotify, I'm on Apple, I'm on Amazon, I'm on iHeartRadio, and listen to an episode that speaks to you, because there are so many different topics. And I just enjoy learning and meeting new people throughout this process. I've done some amazing organizations all the way from South Africa to the Amazon to all over the US. And so I feel like it's an absolute privilege to be a host of Small and Gutsy. Thank you.
Well,
thank you for having me.
Be a host of this conversation as well. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you, Mary. It was just great. I loved it.